Hello and welcome to our BetaKit Live. We here at BetaKit have teamed up with Cisco Designed for Small Businesses for a great special conversation today on leading change. I have a wonderful lineup of Canadian tech leaders to speak with us today. Now, this conversation is about adapting to change, and very aptly, we are all doing this, obviously, from the comfort of our homes. So a heads up, you may hear some cats, dogs, hopefully no fire alarms, though, in the background. But with that, let's get started with some intros. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Megan Simpson. I'm the associate editor here at BetaKit. With me today, I have Laura Buhler, the executive director of C100, Amy Shah, the CEO and co-founder of social and emotional learning platform Pika Pak, and Erin Hipp, the country leader for cloud management IT company Cisco Meraki. I will let each of our guests introduce themselves in a bit more detail and tell you more about what they do. Laura, let's turn it to you first.
Thank you so much for having me on, Megan. It's a real honor, and I hope everyone is reaching us from the safety and security and seclusion of their own home today. So yes, I'm Laura Buhler. I run a nonprofit based out of San Francisco called C100, and our nonprofit exists in this world where we believe that Canada's 2 to 3 million citizens outside of its own borders are actually a huge untapped resource for the country. Specifically, C100 galvanizes the global Canadian tech diaspora and runs programs to better connect them to Canada's startup community and vice versa. We run several programs that help Canadian founders in Canada connect with a very diverse and global pool of Canadian talent, mentors, and investors.
Sorry about that, guys. Amy, why don't you give us a little bit more about what you do at Pika Pak?
Definitely. Thanks for having me today as well. And Peekapak is a social emotional learning or education technology platform. And that's all about teaching young children skills like empathy, self-regulation, optimism, which all can be linked to supporting student well-being and mental health. And so we work with schools across North America, but we've definitely expanded into the Australian and New Zealand market. And we're seeing globally the increased need for supporting student well-being, the mental health, and then being able to deliver that through technology so that it can meet where students are now, often learning from home.
Mm-hmm. And last but very much not least, Erin, tell us a little bit more about what you do at Cisco Meraki.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Hipp. I am the country leader for the Meraki business unit within Cisco Canada. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Meraki, we were a small startup in San Francisco roughly 7 years ago. We were acquired by Cisco. So my humble beginnings were pivoting and adjusting. We sold networking equipment that was all managed through a browser interface. We called it zero touch deployment at the time, which, as you can imagine now, is really popular language. And so we've been able to grow and adapt and been really well supported by Cisco. So now here I am 5 jobs later within Cisco and thrilled to be leading Canada and thrilled to be here with all of you for this discussion. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. I'm really looking forward to all the different perspectives that we're going to have in this conversation today. Before we do get started, though, I should let the viewers know that if you want to submit questions, you can do so on Facebook and Twitter. So if you have any questions, send them over and we'll look to get those answered for you. So today, obviously, as we mentioned, we're talking about stories of change due to the pandemic, its effects on companies, customer demands, the market, and beyond. Obviously, this is something we've been covering at BetaKit, doing our best to track anyway over this past year. And I couldn't ask for a better group of people to share their insights on this. And I think a great place to start off with is yourself, Amy, as the leader of not only a Canadian tech startup, but a startup in the ed tech space. I can only imagine the changes you've seen over this past year, and how your company has adapted, or you've seen others adapt in this space as well. And I know last year you spoke with BetaKit editor-in-chief Douglas on our Black Swan podcast about some of those changes. But why don't you tell us a bit more about how you've adapted Pika Pak to roll with the tides?
Yeah, definitely. When COVID happened, we weren't sure whether this would be good or bad, because there were a lot of reports that came out saying a lot of states in the US would have less revenues and dollars to give to their school system, so they wouldn't be able to purchase actually resources. There would be a deficit. But what ended up happening was that the government really did step up in the US to be able to increase their support for mental health and well-being. And we've seen kind of a change in that mentality and that focus and that awareness around the need for supporting student well-being, and also the fact that we're all virtual, we're all learning from home, we're all having to adapt. And so we've seen that there's been a surge of interest. That being said, the first 3 months of the pandemic, it was an eerie quiet. We weren't sure what was going to happen. And we knew a lot of schools were actually working from home. They were adapting quickly, trying to train their teachers. And so we quickly actually decided to make our full resource fully free. So we made all our pro resources free, available to all schools. And we saw over a couple thousand teachers and administrators and leaders be able to request support for about 750,000 students around the world. And we granted access to everyone that requested access. And on top of that, we were able to really adjust what we offered educators. So we adapted our curriculum to really support things like, having to present over Google meetings and presentations, being able to even have conversations about the pandemic. So in our series of curriculum, we have a world called Pikaville. And unfortunately, in Pikaville, there was the Pika flu. And, it was a bummer. Everything got canceled. Things, changed, and the students had to figure out, or the characters had to figure out how to make sense of that, to be able to support the community, to, be responsible and stay at home, to, think about showing gratitude to the frontline workers. And so we created a whole series of lessons that were very popular with students and with families, to be able to have those important conversations. And that's been really exciting, that we were able to take that leadership role to support young learners. We also realized that a lot of students, especially if they were learning from home, didn't necessarily have access to laptops or dedicated computers. And so it also required adaptation to ensure that our game, for example, was adapted to be an iPad or iPhone app or whatever the device was, and so that it was accessible for all learners. So there were a number of adaptations that we had to do, and I think we were lucky to have school partners who really vocalized what they needed and partnered with us in those different changes, and so we can adapt and really meet the needs of our students and families and educators.
Mm-hmm. I think one interesting thing I've really seen over the pandemic is it's obviously been so hard for everyone, and small businesses particularly, but tech startups come into this, with a bit of a different angle. So Amy, was it almost a natural transition when it came to COVID and having to do all this stuff? Or was there things that you really had to focus down on and adapt because of the pandemic?
I think we were lucky that we were digital already as an education solution. So that was natural for us to be able to kind of speak to how they can leverage our resource in this situation, but we still needed to really meet the needs of this unique kind of situation in terms of content, or even just how people were delivering instruction. So there was still a lot of listening to our teachers, our educator community, but also our administrators in schools, to say, how can we best meet the needs to provide the training and support that teachers needed, even providing support to families. So we started offering family engagement nights where we were educating our parents about why this is important, how they can support children at home. These things had to be kind of considered as we really spoke deeply with our customers to understand what they needed most to navigate these changes.
Right. And speaking of kind of connecting with the community, Laura, as a leader of an organization that works with many startups, with touch points in Canada and the US, how have you seen obviously it's different for every startup, but on a broad spectrum, how have you seen startups in your circle adapting during this pandemic?
I would say that, first, let's just set the context on our industry, which I don't use the word innovation very often, but I will just say is generally the innovation sector. So everything from, IT, ICT, communication technology to life sciences to deep tech and biotech. I would say, just to set the context, of course, our industry has proven to be very resilient through a pandemic. There are just other industries that have been hit so hard. It does not, I don't say that to take away how difficult and challenging it has been to lead a startup in the tech space through the pandemic. But some of the numbers actually just really prove this out. So actually, just to give you some US and Canada context, because actually the two countries have shown slightly different trends in general. I'm about to give some venture capital stats, which are not the only measure of a healthy technology industry, as most companies are private. And we're working with a lot of startups to what I've sometimes heard called scale-ups or growth companies. In general, we use venture capital investment dollars as a proxy for the general health and size and growth of the industry. And in the United States, actually, 2020 hit an all-time high for venture capital investment. The same did not happen in Canada. Actually, Canada was down in 2020 over 2019, but it was still up over the 5-year average. So 2020 was still a better year than 2015, 16, 17, 18, and it was only down over the previous year. And so in general, all boats look like they're headed in the right direction in the technology sector, in at least on this continent. And so I would say, I've definitely seen some great adaptation stories, but this industry was poised to go remote better than any other industry. It was poised to increase its sales. Software sales are up across the board because the products that a lot of these tech companies are creating are actually products that are used for digitization of industry overall. And so in general, I think the adaptation story that you're talking about is one that's very good. That does not take away from how tough it was in the beginning. So C100 is a community of largely founders and people who are kind of circumfounder folks in the technology industry. At the beginning, we focused a lot on virtual roundtable discussions, mentorship sessions. We had a series called Startup Playbook for a Sudden Downturn, which is just helping founders find each other and find mentors and advisors on, what are you guys doing? So a lot of teams took major risks on their employee count. We saw executive teams cutting executive compensation across the board, anything to kind of stay resilient, tighten the belt, and make sure that they were in for the long haul. And of course, it has ended up being a very long haul on COVID, but I think the negative impacts on the technology industry really were shorter lived, certainly, than they have been in other industries. I'll also just call out that growth, in 2020, the US had a record number of new unicorn companies, which is companies of $1 billion, private companies with $1 billion valuation or more. That's 28 of them were added in just Q4 of 2020 alone. And then, of course, there's actually more in 2020 overall, 225 unicorn companies in the United States in 2020, which is setting another kind of record high. And so when we talk about, leading through change and what the challenges are that founders have experienced, it is a little bit of a tale of two economies, what people are seeing in tech. Of course, challenges of leading team, challenges of finding new ways to connect with your customers, maybe even needing to completely pivot product, like Amy just mentioned, had to launched a whole new product. But overall, the industry, I think, has done quite well and is still a really attractive place to be if you're a worker during the pandemic.
Yeah, and that's a narrative we've really seen borne out. I just remember reporting at BetaKit in March of last year, a year ago. We completely had to flip how we did reporting because everyone, leaders, CEOs, even in the tech industry, were really unsure. But over this past year, we've really seen, as you've said, Laura, this narrative pan out where there has been a lot more success, whether it's in the US or notably here in Canada as well. But there is obviously, like you said, a tale of two stories, because that's not always the same. It seemed like the tech industry or innovation sector, if we'll call it that, was really well poised. And so, Erin, I think that's a great place to bring you into the conversation. With Cisco Meraki, how did the corporation, on a high level, adapt to COVID, and how did you see that play out on the Meraki team level?
Yes. So if I look kind of internally at how Cisco and Meraki immediately responded, um, the culture really shined. And so it was leading with compassion for everyone. So that was our customers, our partners, our peers. And there was this like explicit message to everyone that taking care of yourself and your family was a top priority. And so I think just having that in the background and knowing that we're all here to do a job and it's really important, but taking care of ourselves is a priority really helped us to take care of our customers. And so from then, we realized we were moving at a very quick pace. We weren't driving from meeting to meeting or walking into different meetings. And so we really tried and stressed creating some of those more informal moments in the conversations that we were having. And I think that helped us not only to create some new meaningful relationships with our peers and our customers, but also it got us into a position where we could really start to tackle some new problem solving. So every conversation led with, what are the new challenges that you're seeing? What are you worried about right now? And what are you worried about in the future for your business? And so the team got together. We had a Google sheet and we had kind of our top industries, verticals, public sector, K to 12, retail. We were working through the work from home experience. And then we were sharing our stories. What are the top concerns and issues that these customers are trying to solve? How can technology help them solve it? Can we save customers money right now that are strapped? And then what resources did we need to be able to move quickly? And from there, it actually became a really fun exercise of gathering this feedback from our customers and saying, okay, you have this problem to solve. Our technology can help you by doing XYZ. And then we would stick it on a slide in a PowerPoint deck and it was all circulating. So we were literally creating new solutions daily on the fly. And as much as we were helping our customers, they were really great to come to us and say, here's a challenge that we're having. Your cameras or your wireless solutions can help us by doing XYZ. And that gave us the opportunity then to do a lot of best practice sharing. So from there, like I'm sure many on the call, it's been a lot of iterating. So I feel like these days we're usually trading one challenge for another challenge, but we've really tried to adopt what I've heard Adam Grant refer to as macro management, where I'm just trying as a leader to provide as much context as what we're seeing in the industry, what we're seeing within the company, why we're making the decisions that we're making, and a lot of cases, why we're pivoting, because we're moving really quickly and we're making the best decisions that we can right now with a lot of changing information. But I have found that approach has been really well received with the team and with our customers. And I do feel like it's been kind of a journey of working through all of this together.
Mm-hmm. And obviously at Cisco Meraki, like you've mentioned, you work with a lot of small businesses, notably in the retail and education space as well, which obviously connects us back to Amy and Peekapak. So, what are some of the challenges or ways that you've seen those companies adapt, or you've helped those companies adapt in, maybe specifically ed tech or education or other major spaces that you've seen those necessary changes needed?
Yes. So I'll start at a macro level because I think that's the easiest place. So we had a small business recovery campaign that we led in spring into summer, where small businesses could apply. We had Meraki networking equipment and some WebEx licenses that we were giving to companies if they could tell us how they would use the technology to transform their business. And so there were some common themes that came out of those applications and conversations. One was that wireless was no longer a nice to have for their businesses. It was a must have. It had to be easy to deploy. It had to be reliable. A second was around security. So a lot of our customers were moving applications to the cloud. They were moving into e-commerce platforms, or in some cases, they were moving away from their headquarter location and wanted to make sure that their data passing through was secure. secure. And the third was around collaboration. So many of us are, familiar and comfortable with the art of the virtual meeting or WebEx meeting, but for a lot of our customers, this was a new motion. And so those were probably the biggest themes that we saw from a small business perspective holistically. If we look at specific industries and verticals that we play strongly in, and of course, I mentioned to Amy, near and dear to my heart is her focus on student outcomes, because we were focusing on student outcomes in a different way. So she mentioned kind of sending students home and this equitable access to Wi-Fi. We realized very quickly when students were going home that not everybody had that equitable access. And so we were working with schools and libraries to put outdoor access points on the sides of buildings so students could come and access the internet that way. Or in some cases, we were loading up networks with cellular full networks, putting them on school buses and driving them to locations where there was a lower penetration of wireless. We were using our mobile device management software to push applications out and give administrators an opportunity to get tablets out quickly and make sure that they were being monitored and they were being used safely within homes. So that was a lot of our immediate need. A second immediate need kind of around work from home was an example that comes to mind is a financial services customer that plays in banking and plays in insurance and needed to send their people home and needed secure access to all of the information, and their customers couldn't wait. So we were able to architect some work from home solutions that helped get those workers safely at home. And I think the last main vertical that we saw immediate needs from were our retail customers. And so there's a tale of two retailers. There were the essential retailers like the grocers. So we needed to make sure that the staff and shoppers were safe. So we used a ecosystem partner called Analytics AI and our cameras to monitor people coming in and out, and had screens in front of the locations that showed green, it's safe to enter, or red, too many people, wait here. And we also have been kind of working and iterating on some curbside pickup solutions as well, with wireless proximity and even some license plate detection stuff. So as you can tell, there's a wide variety of the different types of customers that we've been working with. But it's been fun to have a technology that's nimble, and it's been kind of an exciting challenge to help some of these businesses actually thrive during a challenging time as opposed to just surviving.
Right. And one thing when we were talking before this panel, Erin, I thought you mentioned that was really interesting is you were really comfortable with change, and you're talking a lot about these changes and iterations, whether it's at Cisco, Meraki, or at businesses. And, when it comes to the tech ecosystem and the startup space, obviously, CEOs and founders are, change and adaptation is not foreign, right? So I guess, Laura, my question for you is, is COVID just the latest thing that, leaders are having to navigate when they're adapting their small businesses based on what you've seen? Is it just the next thing that they have to deal with? Or is this something that's brand new, creating new challenges?
I think it's brand new. I think it's it's accelerating a lot of trends that have been in the ecosystem for a long time. So what am I referring to? The pre-COVID, I think if you asked me to tell you what's the biggest challenge that our startups in Canada face, it is about access to talent and their quickness to scale. Those, vis-a-vis other competitors or their counterparts in the US, for example. COVID has really presented some leveling of the playing field on that access to talent, and certainly on Canadian startups' ability to scale. And I think that the shift in the working model has been, I guess there are people out there who have a little bit of a different mindset and lots of arguments about why it could go, things are just going to bounce back to be completely normal again. I'm not one of those people. I think that work culture has changed forever. I think that new markets have opened up for talent, and that will be the case forever. And you can see it happening starting from the leadership of the giant tech companies like Facebook and Shopify and Uber, Slack, Microsoft. Many of these companies going to distributed workforces in a way that really only, companies like Asana, did historically. And so today, especially if you're on, founder forums online, watching people start businesses, I get the sense that more businesses are started by virtual as a default today than ever before. And it also has leveled the playing field on access to talent. So what's my point with this about what's going on in Canada? Pre-COVID, some of the biggest challenges on access to talent were largely driven by a supply-demand situation. Basically, the US is outcompeting Canada for top executive talent and wooing a lot of executive-type Canadians south of the border. They pay more, on average, actually $87,000 US more, and that persists across the sort of ranks of management, from management all the way up to the C-suite. Not only that, but it's really hard to attract them back when Canadian companies on average raise less money as well. So pre-pandemic, Canadian companies raised just a little more than half of that of what their US counterparts raise. In fact, it's one of the metrics is on median pre-exit capital raise. So at the time that the company is no longer an independent company, so at the time of exit, which means they're selling to someone else or going public, Canadian companies have raised on average $6.8 million versus US counterparts, which is almost $16 million. So if you couple that, they're raising less, so they have less to spend on top talent, and you've got companies across the border willing to pay for that talent in a way that they can't find in their own market of Victoria or Edmonton or Toronto or Montreal or wherever someone is based. That creates a real problem, a real challenge, I guess, for Canadian-based startups. Similarly, in the US, now talk about San Francisco versus rest of US. San Francisco has been an incredibly tight labor market for the last really 4 decades, but especially for the last 5 years until COVID. And that's also just simple supply and demand. The labor market is super tight. It pushes wage pressure up and cost of living up, and it makes for a really difficult time competing with San Francisco companies if you're a startup in Reno or in Portland or Austin or Miami. COVID-19 has virtually opened up the rest of the world. And I want to emphasize, this is not just because of COVID-19. This trend has been happening for a long time. Silicon Valley is still by far the largest source of capital and the largest source of high valuation startups on the continent. I don't say in the world, because I know Shenzhen in China is giving Silicon Valley a real run for its money. And so while it is still the biggest, its relative position in the tech world is shrinking. And that's an amazing thing to see if you're a startup in, I'll start with Salt Lake City or Boston or, Santa Fe, New Mexico, or Calgary, Alberta. And so I think that, the changes that we've seen during COVID are really different because they're not going away. And I also think this should be encouraging, though. I've seen in this last year alone, I've seen a ton of repatriation of Canadian technologists from the Bay Area, for example, repatriate, move back to Canada at least part-time during the year, many of whom have fully packed their bags and given up their status in the US for good. So all of that is a really interesting trend. We'll have to see if that continues post-COVID. But more than anything, what I think is, presents a really cool opportunity for Canadian startups is that the world's their oyster for talent now. Right? And they can basically hire talent anywhere. Doesn't all have to be within, 5-mile radius of the office in downtown Montreal. It could be really from anywhere. And this just gives Canadian startups an opportunity to really compete.
Right. Yeah. So while some of the challenges obviously might be new and some acceleration is happening a lot because of COVID, I wonder if though the things you learn as a founder and as a leader, prior to this crazy outlier year that we've seen, are really, you can use those things to bring it into this COVID experience. So Amy, obviously you've spoken in the past about, some major changes or adaptations you've had with Pika Pak, like even near the beginning when you were in your YC accelerator, when you moved from actually a physical product to becoming a digital product. So, what did you take from that experience or other experiences you've had in the past doing, adaptations into this past year?
Yeah, I think as a founder, you learn quickly that you need to adapt and pivot and iterate, like the other panelists have mentioned. And I think having those early experiences, you do learn to kind of have to kind of roll with it and figure out how you listen deeply to your customers, how you kind of test different hypotheses, and you leverage your network, your mentors, your advisors, your board to make those decisions. So I think having that early experience where we went from a physical product to a digital product and to the education market, I think really helped us think about how do we break things down to small testable hypotheses that we can kind of test and iterate and make sure that we're not only meeting the needs of our customers, but we're kind of growing and adapting to meet the needs of the market. So I think that was really helpful for us as we approach COVID and learned that things were changing and we needed to adapt. Luckily, we had a lot of things that worked really well, and I think we benefited from not only having something that worked really well in the market, but also something that adapted to meet the needs even further. So we saw definitely a lot of new customers and organizations really want to embrace not only ed tech, which is exciting to see in the industry, but also really make social emotional learning or student well-being a priority at their school, so that students did have the tools to cope and make sense of today's reality.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions we've actually gotten from the viewers is, and I think Amy, this is one for yourself and Laura as well, were tech companies better prepared for the shift to remote, and were they better prepared to make these changes during the pandemic?
I would think so, for sure. I mean, I think as a team, we already use a lot of online tools to organize our meetings, to our product process and roadmap. So I think for us, it wasn't a huge adaptation for us to be remote and be able to work with our customers. If anything, it was a huge bonus to be able to train, especially in an industry like education, where a lot of our larger customers were used to having in-person meetings or coming to conferences. All of a sudden, we were able to shift to virtual meetings and cut down our costs of travel and marketing and really be able to connect with people through virtual means. So I think, if anything, we were really able to take advantage of that and adapt really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Laura, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the question is if tech companies were better able to adapt, and the question is better than what? And I think probably better than any other industry, yes. However, it does not mean that everybody just knew how to go remote. So I think while some of the technical barriers and business-related barriers are less for tech companies, the management barriers are still just as potent and as real for technology companies and people who are fluent with the world of technology and online media and that sort of thing, as those who are not. So if you are a manager who depends on seeing people in person a lot to both build your camaraderie and your rapport with them, but also to make sure that kind of things are happening the way you expect them to happen, this would have been a real learning shift. And it certainly was for me. And I think it was for a lot of technology companies. And so I think what you probably will also see this year, even not just within the tech sector, but more broadly, and I'd say that's probably true in every sector, from nonprofit to small business to hospitality to technology, is that the really good leaders are getting used to things like OKRs and like stand-up meetings and like, making expectations super, super clear because you're not necessarily in person every day to reinforce them. It also, I think, changes, at least for me as a leader, changes my purview from kind of visibility and like roll with the punches to actually being very planful. Very planful about the goals that you want to achieve, and then making it very transparent literally on paper, but not on paper. Of course, it's on a screen about what we actually want to accomplish in a given time frame, whether those are your OKRs for the year, or for the quarter, or for the month, or for the week. And so I think that, yes, the industry was poised to do really well. The truth is, like, if you are in the business of selling anything that helps with efficiencies or digitization, you should, there's a good chance that your industry had a real wave kind of tailwinds behind it this past year. But it does not change that those same leaders may not have been equipped by default for the management and leadership challenges that come with managing everyone remotely.
For sure. And I think that's a really great point. And it connects to another question that we got from the audience is, and this one might be more for you, Amy, is social emotional learning something founders can focus on in their own teams or with themselves? I think that really connects with what Laura was just kind of mentioning there. What are your thoughts on that, Amy?
Oh, definitely. I mean, part of what we do is actually educate the adults in the room. So educators, leaders, and even as a team, we need to practice these skills because it comes down to things as simply as building that self-awareness. So if you think about COVID and all the stress that we're facing, all the anxiety we may be facing, being able to understand how that emotion is showing up, not only in your body, in your mind, will only then allow you to do the second part of self-regulation, for example, in terms of calming yourself. So we teach young children, how do I show my calm body? What does a calm body look like? And, we think that that's just for little kids, but at the end of the day, as adults, like we're going to face situations where, maybe we're driving in traffic and we're stressed. It's like, okay, how do I, again, realize that I'm feeling stressed? How do I then take a deep breath? How do I calm myself down? And so we're definitely doing a lot more emphasis throughout COVID about, teacher or adult well-being, and how do we not only practice these skills for ourselves, but also, as we model this to younger kids. And I think likewise for founders, it becomes, I think, a crucial skill. I think early on for me, I actually got called out on it. They're like, you're promoting this great product, but are you actually practicing self-regulation skills? Are you practicing what you're preaching here? And so I know I did a lot of inward reflection and thinking about how I can, what are my tool set of strategies to practice that calm body, for example. So I use things like mindfulness or reflection and journaling or yoga. And so thinking about what really is your go-to. And I think likewise, teams and founders should do that reflection as well. And there's great resources that I'm happy to point to other folks. You can always email me at hello@peekapak.com.
I was going to say, Amy, I feel like I need to hit you up after this. You can tell me all the secrets on how I can have my calm body. I feel like I very much need that. So, and speaking of that, I think one really important part of this conversation is, as a founder and a leader running a company, adapting, we're in the middle of a very unprecedented global pandemic. And with that comes those things like mental health and having to deal with that on top of, running a business. And Amy, I know you've been open about that in the past. There was a recent article you were listed in a group of women leaders, and you noted, you've had to deal with mental health during the adapting to changes as well. So how have you done that this past year?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think burnout is a big risk for any founder, and I definitely, through my journey, have gone close to that point as well. And I think in the last year, I've done a lot of work around things like exercise and taking walks when I need them. I think just getting out and getting nature, it was like a big thing just to have that kind of change of pace when you're at home all the time. Journaling has been a friend of mine, just being able to reflect on the day and how I'm feeling and how it's affecting me. That's definitely helpful. And there's definitely different journaling techniques that you can use as a founder. as well as mindfulness. I have a practice of, I actually just keep it really simple. I just use an app. For me, that was really accessible, and just having that daily check-in has really always kept me on point. And one last thing I'll mention is a shout out to my founder forum. And I have a group of other founders that I get to meet with confidentially and be able to kind of share what's on my mind, what's happening, and get that mentorship and support from other founders who have gone through this, or be able to give other ways of navigating that change as well.
Mm-hmm. Erin or Laura, do you have any thoughts on how you guys have dealt with that as well over this past year?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Amy said ring true with me as well. Managing my own burnout, but also trying to recognize the burnout in those around us and setting good examples. And also, I realized when I worked with some of my leaders, and they were comfortable with talking about the fact that like it was a tough week that week, and it not isn't necessarily the tasks that we're doing, but maybe getting up and moving into the same room and sitting there for 9 hours straight was difficult for them that week, and just open the door to have some of that dialogue. I think that was really really big for me, and really eye-opening to say, wow, if you're okay to talk about this, I'm okay to talk about this too. And I think that's helped a lot. I also feel like coming into sitting at home all day, every day, and working from here, I was in a role for the previous 7 years where I was 75% travel, as I'm sure a lot of people here are or were in roles that are kind of on the go. And I think even just settling in this stillness, there was always an excuse on, I don't exercise because of this, or I didn't even know if I liked travel. It was just like a part of who I was, and everything was so busy that there was a point a couple months in where sitting with like the uncomfortableness of no distractions other than like you are here, and there's no excuses for how you're feeling or what you're doing. It gave me an opportunity to really reflect about, what do I care about, what's important to me. And that led me to probably the best coping skill that I came up with, which was starting to create blocks of time that were my time throughout the day. And instead of using the early hours and the late hours to catch up on things because we were cramming these back-to-back virtual meetings in, using my workday to actually get work done, and just having that space for my mind to get into a rhythm and get creative, or brainstorm with someone, or have that moment to pick up the phone. It was a game-changing moment for me and my mental health and happiness. And so if anyone is struggling with the go, go, go and the burnout, I highly recommend finding a couple hours on your calendar and blocking them off and seeing if you can get yourself in that mental rhythm. It was really helpful for me.
Mm-hmm. Laura, anything to add?
Wonderful points by the other two panelists, by the way. Thank you for sharing that. One thing I would add is that I think that when we talk about mental health, sometimes we are really talking about these behavioral adaptations that those of us who are largely mentally healthy can make to stay healthy. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think what we're not talking about is mental illness. And there's a lot of mental illness in our industry. And I will say that I don't consider myself working through mental illness, but I have struggled with anxiety a lot throughout my whole childhood and my adult life. And this year has been one of the most, like, I guess, awakened of my life in terms of my panic response, my just general stress level, burnout, pain, like physical pain, and other symptoms of anxiety before they become really severe. But I also realize that that's a really common state for a lot of people who run businesses or small businesses or founders to go through. But this year, if any of you know people or are people who struggle with real other issues of mental illness, so severe anxiety, clinical depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, obsessive compulsive disorder, and addictions. These are things that each one, I have people close in my life with every one of those conditions and who struggle with those things. And I would say this last year, it's been clear that they have reared such an ugly head in some people's lives. And so often when we as a tech community talk about mental health, we're talking about things that almost seem like small time compared to people who really deal with sometimes more severe mental illness that need a lot of care and intervention by professionals. So I just say that because I'm incredibly empathetic towards people who in their own lives and in their family and communities are working with mental illness. So when I talk about my mental health journey, I don't want to make any one of those people think like, oh, you just need to exercise more and do mindfulness and which all of those things are great adaptive things to learn for anybody. But it is definitely a different degree of intervention required, I think, to help people going through those things. My own mental health journey this year has been it's been like a real challenge. And unlike the other panelists, I'll say I don't have like a magic, tactic that I've learned and managed to keep as a habit. I'd say that I've had really good weeks and really challenging weeks. And some of the things that have been consistent in my life, however, that I think are worth sharing is that I have been lucky to have, a therapist and an executive coach. I have two different people in my life. One is very personal and one is professional, that have really helped me set goals and maintain, I think, a degree of like habit and self-reflection around just like what's going on with me at any given time. But I have, in terms of like exercise, mindfulness, sleep, etc., really found that there are like really like great weeks where I'm building amazing habits and then they break. And so I would just say that the other major habit is intense awareness. So like I have learned, I think, especially this year, to be able to be very aware, like almost like looking from the outside in to myself about how I'm feeling. And so like observing, for example, my panic response, or observing, I'm so sore because I've been clenching my back all day, or, those things I would say I've probably been self-aware over this past year than any other year in my life. So those are the things I'd share. The other thing is I just want to call out to leaders, leaders everywhere. I am not a parent. I'm not taking care of elderly and aging parents. There's like life experiences during COVID that have made for incredibly challenging experiences for people. And so I have a ton of empathy for that, though I don't speak from personal experience. However, I do have the experience of being responsible for an organization and responsible for people, for people's jobs, and for community looking to you to have the answers and to be confident and certain and like this is the strategy and we're doing it and I'm motivating you. And I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but for the most part, my own approach has been like, there are just a limited number of people that I can express my sometimes very sincere discomfort and anxiety with. And those are people that you need to keep really close and show gratitude to. There's some of the people on my board of directors that I've assembled around me over the years. Like I said, an executive coach really helps with that as well, because you don't go to your team that you lead and say, I really need a personal day because I'm just so stressed out from this. Like, at least I don't. Maybe some leaders do, but I need to be there for them to be able to, be stressed and have off days. And so I think having those resources is incredibly valuable. And then of course, the person if you are with someone like I am, the person I spend my life with has been an incredible resource as well. And someone that I've been able to really open up to about, just general level of stress that you have to deal with. And then the last thing I'll say is that if you're, anything like me, I have found COVID to be, yes, a period of the deepest self-reflection and spiritual awakening, probably of any other year of my adult life. And you hear this a lot from people for sure. But I think sometimes of like career and work, like it is a hamster wheel, and some people thrive in that. I'm one of them. I love to be like busier than I can handle, more pressure than I can handle, like always like 11 amps go to 11 on everything. That's like who I am. But there has to be a well that you go back to so that you don't burn out. And for me, I think that well was things like going for dim sum on a Saturday morning and going to a show on Thursday night with my partner, and having friends over for dinner and traveling back to Canada to see my family. None of those things have happened this year. And so I think, being able to also understand what are the things that I need in my life to like replenish, how do I get those back for good? That's something we all need, and leaders especially, because you leave it all on the field from Monday to Friday with your team, and you need something on Saturday and Sunday to kind of perk you back up again before you're ready to take more hits in the next week.
Yeah, I think that those are really great points, Laura, and thank you so much for sharing that, and to everyone on this panel for kind of sharing that stuff. I know for myself, Laura, I kind of deal with a very similar situation with, anxiety, and this year has been just, as you mentioned, I'll go into it again. I think you explained it really well. And therapy and physio, talking about doing this all the time, have been like my saviors so far. Not that it's perfect every day, but thank you guys so much for sharing those stories. I think one thing that really shows us is everyone, no matter whether it's just general mental wellness or mental illness or being the leader of a company or an organization, we're all going through these changes, and it's not necessarily easy. It's not hard. Tech in the innovation industry might have been, more well adapted, but we're all facing challenges. And I think, I want to end this off with no one's an island, right? And Erin, you provide mentorship to other leaders, aside from being the country leader of Meraki yourself. So I'd like to end this off on each of you, just noting the time here, each of you just giving a quick point on maybe either some advice you have as a mentor or advice that you've gotten from advisors or mentors that you're really keeping with you as we continue to adapt to this pandemic. Erin, why don't we start with you? Oh, you might, yeah.
I promised myself I wouldn't do it today, and I did. So I've been really lucky to have some wonderful mentors and mentees throughout my career. And I think being home, it's opened up to having more of those discussions. And something I've noticed recently is, when starting up those discussions, a lot of times we try to work to find the common threads. And I've been trying to take a bit of a different approach where we're trying to focus on what makes us different and unique. And I want people to be comfortable talking about what makes us different, because I think we end up in a much better, more interesting place when we're getting all different types of perspective. And so part of my advice would be for these conversations, you find the common thread that brings you together, but really lean into what makes you different and unique. And I think it unlocks a whole different conversation with any of the leaders that you might be working with or anyone that you're gaining mentorship from. I also think it's really important to be explicit. So I work with an organization called SheEO. We work with female entrepreneurs and women-run businesses, and we get emails that have very explicit asks on what kind of advice they need. And I think the more explicit you are, the better equipped people are to help. And it's been really helpful for me because I'm like, ooh, I have that area of expertise. I really know I could lean in and help that person. And then the last thing I would say is remember entering all of these conversations that you have something to add. So I think a lot of times people get nervous. They're like, oh, this person's really busy. They have, a big career, or they're a founder, or whatever the case may be. But your new, interesting perspective is also of value to people like me. So I find in all of these relationships, I'm getting just as much value out of the conversation as the person that's asking. So I encourage you to go in with confidence, ask for exactly what you want, and lean into what makes you different.
Mm-hmm. Amy, best advice you could give or advice that you've gotten from an advisor or a mentor that you'd like to share?
I think in terms of when I think about working with our team and what we're going through over COVID, and just even cycling back to the previous question around mental health and well-being, I think it's being really empathetic and giving opportunities for our team to be vulnerable, to speak about the things that are important to them. And I know, for example, on our team, we've had people who have I've had parents who've had COVID and have had loss of their family. And so really giving that opportunity that not only are you providing that professional support, but that emotional support through all this change has been really important. And to give that opportunity for people to just even listen. I think often we're in this rush to get things done and give that support, but that emotional support is also going to be really helpful in terms of adapting and growing as a leader or as an employee on a team as well. So I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. And Laura, why don't you round us out?
Sure. So I would highly recommend everyone read. You probably all read the Sequoia Black Swan event blog post at the beginning of COVID. They just published a kind of now what blog post just last week. Definitely worth taking a look at. Here's what I'm thinking about right now is optimism and how much we crave something to look forward to, how much we crave community and how much we crave, accomplishment. We are starting to turn a corner in COVID. And at least from me and a lot of leaders, we have been so short-term focused for over a year. Okay, everything we're thinking about a year from now, we got to think in 3-week sprints, right? We're thinking super short-term. What do we need to cancel? What can we push go on? Now is the time that we're turning a corner. And as they write in the Sequoia blog post, the best turn, you start to accelerate at the apex of the turn. If you are optimistic about the future and the way the world is going to look in 6 months to 8 months, now is the time to start planning for what you need to have in place at that time to fully capture the opportunity that is coming our way. I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of how we're going to emerge out of this crisis. And so for me, and for I think any leader who also you've weathered the storm to date, you're going to be fine. You're going to make it through. Start to actually think optimistically and plan for that world to be the case. And I think that's also going to give you a ton of motivation and your teams a ton of motivation because it's so exciting to know what's going to be on the other side of this.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great place to end it, optimism. And, I really want to thank each and every one of you for being so candid during this panel. I think hopefully our audience and viewers really enjoyed this. I really appreciate you guys sharing everything you did today. And that kind of brings us to time. So Laura, Erin, Amy, thank you so much again for taking the time today. And thanks to everyone who joined and watched online.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.